This race has not moved much. There's just not that many undecided voters in this contest. We've been watching this at the national level, and for 11 days, we got the exact same reading every single day on where this election is. Kamala Harris, in a way that Joe Biden wasn't able to, was able to bring along that 2020 Democratic coalition to match the level of support Donald Trump has with that same group. The next 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks, is going to be about trying to expand that. This survey is among likely voters. I think Trump's campaign has been pushing very hard to try to reach out to some of those voters on the fringes who may not think they're likely to vote today. And that's where the battle is going to be over the next 12 days.
Well, and as we consider the messaging over the next 12 days, Eli, I do wonder what the data suggests about what the most effective messaging to win over that very small basket of voters actually will be. When we look at this poll, yes, by wide margins, Harris is found to be more mentally fit by battleground voters, 47 to 33% for Trump. She's seen as more honest by a margin of 10 points. She's seen as compassionate by a margin of 16. Donald Trump, 48% said is dangerous compared to just 35% who said the same for Harris. So as she makes the case here about his unfitness for office, as we mentioned, calling him a fascist yesterday in her town hall on CNN, is that the kind of language that is ultimately going to make the difference? Because all that said about how voters feel about Trump from a personality standpoint, if you will, he's still tied with her across these states.
Yeah. The dangerous message does meet the electorate where it is. About half of voters in these swing states see Trump as dangerous. And, if you look at the kind of voters who are supporting Kamala Harris's bid, they are less likely than Donald Trump's backers to say their vote is a vote for their candidate. They're more likely to say it's a vote against Trump. And these voters in the middle, the independent voters, the kinds of folks who are more likely to be undecided still, in Kamala Harris's camp, the independent voters supporting Kamala Harris are far more likely to be negatively motivated. And so those kinds of messages seem aimed to that chunk of the electorate. It's policy versus personality. And in the last few weeks, when you're running against Donald Trump, that personality argument carries a lot of weight.
I'm struck by this plurality of swing state voters, likely voters, believe that Kamala Harris will win the election, even though we have a tied number here. This is fascinating to me, Eli, the prospect of a self-fulfilling prophecy. We hear a lot about voters who like to try to pick a winner. Does this advantage Kamala Harris?
It shows energy. This is one metric of where the momentum is in the campaign. But this number's pretty close too. 45% think she'll win, 41% think Trump will win in the swing states. She has a bit of a energy advantage on this question over Donald Trump, but not by much. I would just point out that this kind of goes against some of the online hand-wringing among the left. Voters in these key states see a lot of energy behind Kamala Harris, and they think she has an advantage, those supporting her, but it's matched by those backing Donald Trump. There's not a lot of people on either side of the aisle who think the other party is going to win.
Well, and as we consider how difficult it's going to be to figure out who wins if the margins is this tight, preparing our audience here on Bloomberg TV and radio for this to take a while to figure out, Eli, it also kind of raises the question as we consider what voters' expectations are of the massive breakdowns we are seeing across demographics, specifically how much more likely it is for women to support Harris and men to support Trump. Can you just walk through the kind of breakdowns across demographics you're looking at, not just by gender, but race as well across these 7 states?
Yeah, Kamala Harris is doing a very good job among women voters. She's doing well among Black voters. There seems to be a bit of attrition, at least compared to 2020, among the youngest voters. And I think that's what we're kind of seeing Kamala Harris try to lean into in this final couple weeks of the campaign. I'm campaigning with Beyonce, for example. It seems like outreach to young folks, sending Barack Obama out to talk to young Black men, a group that among all young men is slipping a bit for the Democratic Party, and trying to get folks back where they would be expected to be in this campaign. This last part of this election, though, I don't want to say the cliche of the election cycle every single year, but it does all come down to turnout here, right? Like who shows up to vote matters. That's what these last 2 weeks are about in this campaign.
It's never meant more. And as we keep saying, who scores last? Kaylee mentioned Kamala Harris up by 3+ in Michigan. Noteworthy here, Donald Trump's best showing in this poll is in North Carolina, up 1.2%. I take that back. In Georgia, 1.5. But I want to ask you about North Carolina specifically, Eli, because there's been quite a bit that's gone on there to disrupt the flow here, not the least of which has been the scandal surrounding the Republican Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson, but also the impact of Hurricane Helene that has caused many people to worry about the very thing you just mentioned, turnout. Could we find ourselves with a very different result in North Carolina because of those factors?
I mean, I think we're seeing folks show up to vote in pretty large numbers in North Carolina already. I think the Mark Robinson issue probably it benefits Democrats to some extent. There's less of a on-the-ground movement for Republicans sort of to try to lift up Donald Trump. But I mean, we're seeing the Trump campaign put a lot of energy into that state, spending a lot of time there. And, Donald Trump doesn't want to lose North Carolina. Losing North Carolina would make some of these blue wall states matter much less for Kamala Harris. If she was able to pull off a victory down in the South, some of these states like Wisconsin, which is tied, might not matter as much if she can pull off a victory down there. So I think that's why Donald Trump is spending so much energy there.
Well, and as we consider where Trump and Harris are spending their energy tomorrow, Eli, you already mentioned her appearing alongside Beyonce in Houston, but the point of her being in Texas, which is a state that will go for Trump in all likelihood, is to talk about specifically reproductive rights and abortion. This idea of that being something that can resonate nationally, even if she goes to Texas to talk about it. How are we seeing that kind of resonance across these states in the Sun Belt and in the Rust Belt, and as she makes that one of the elements of her closing arguments of this campaign?
Yeah, it matters a lot, especially for women. I mean, we're seeing some sort of a divide among women without children versus women with children in this survey. Clearly, those without children are thinking about this abortion issue in a way that maybe others aren't. Texas is also home to a Senate race that is maybe not the most competitive Senate race historically, if you look at the trends in Texas, but it's a close contest. I mean, Ted Cruz is one of the least popular senators in the country, and his Democratic challenger, Colin Allred, is pulling neck and neck with him down there. And so I think it serves two purposes. One is to help maybe try to boost up the Democratic Senate candidate there, and then to elevate this message about abortion nationally. I mean, you don't have to go somewhere for voters to hear what you're saying in the nature of the online campaign that we're living in. I mean, Donald Trump's going to New York to host a big rally at Madison Square Garden, for example. It seems counterintuitive, but on the other hand, I mean, that stuff can still break through, even if he's not in some of these key states.